am here to talk about The Other Half by Charlotte Vassell. I got it wrong in my last video. If you happened to watch to the end where I was talking about what I was currently reading after The Diamond is Big as the Ritz, I think I said I thought her name was Charlotte Villiers or Villers or something like that. I was wrong. It's Vassell. I was giving her more fancy name than perhaps was merited. In any case, I have had to bring the phone out for this because if you follow me on Goodreads, or if you're friended with me on Goodreads, if I'm reading a book that has a lot of problems, I comment. I make comments pretty regularly, and just to keep track of all of those issues, I'm going to have to keep looking at this this phone to remind me of all the things that made me angry while reading this. Okay, so let me give you the overview, and I'll try to do a spoiler-free stuff at the beginning, and then we'll get into spoilers towards the end. But this book, The Other Half, is supposedly the first in a series featuring a detective named Caius Beauchamp. I don't know how you would say it in England. The pronunciation of Beauchamp's last name, I'm just going to go with Beauchamp, because where I'm from, that's what we would say. It goes because one of the other main characters, who is a 30-year-old socialite type guy, his name is Rupert Beecham, spelt Beauchamp, but anglicized over many hundreds of years, one would assume. So that is a thing. They keep talking about how unusual this last name is. It is not, at least not where I'm from. Maybe it is an uncommon last name in England. Again, I don't know. I don't know, but there are a lot of other things in this book that I know are not true, so I guess I am having to take that with a grain of salt as well. In any case, Caius has a partner named Matt and Chung, and then he and Matt are assigned a third kind of helper person whose name is Amy. So that's the team of detectives. That's part of the story, is kind of their thing, and I assume that they will be what goes forward in the series of books. The core mystery here is about the death of a socialite. She's found dead on Hampstead Heath, conveniently by Caius while out jogging. So, at least it wasn't like he had to get a call in. He had to make a call and say, hey, I found a dead body while I was out jogging. There's multi-points of views in this book, so we do see the socialites, Rupert, and some of his friends. He's hung up on a girl named Nell, and in a love triangle between Nell and a guy named Alex. They were all at Oxford together, they all read classics together. And then the dead girl was Rupert's longtime girlfriend, but he was trying to get rid of her so he could get with Nell. But I mean, it had this book wanted to be both the secret history and some kind of modern detective novel, I guess. It's kind of all over the place, which is why it's hard to sum up, but sufficient to say none of the characters were very compelling. They make Nell into this not like other girls, everybody wants to be with her type, but she's also not terribly sympathetic because she behaves in ways that don't make her she makes some decisions that you're just like, they just don't make sense to anybody with common sense, and we're in her head, and she's kind of explaining why she's doing what she's doing, but it's not really, it still doesn't make a lot of, like, I don't know, it still doesn't make a lot of sense. And the detective team is kind of good at their work, but kind of not. And I don't know, this book was frustrating throughout, because I wanted it to be fun and funny. The cover made it look like fun, and it wasn't. It was kind of plotting. It was kind of all over the place. And at the end of the day, it was middling at best. I think I gave it a 2.35, I rounded down to 2 on Goodreads. And part of that is because of some of the writing. So the mystery itself, which goes through a number of little twisty-turny things, but isn't, at the end of the day, anything surprising or, I mean, you know, it was fine. It was just kind of fine. But the writing did it a disservice. There's a lot of head hopping, where, you know, somebody will say something, we'll get their thoughts, then somebody will say something else and we'll get their thoughts, which is not... If you go back, and I use Dune often as the case example for this. This happens in Dune all the time. If you go back and reread Dune, you get that. That was a very common way to write not that long ago. But these days, it's frowned upon. If you're in somebody's POV, if you're in their head, then you stay there until you break. Either, you know, a paragraph break, a chapter break, however you want to do it, but you need to break to show that you've changed perspectives. That doesn't happen here. Multiple times we get, and what we get are like also just the, well, I'll give you an example. So one of the first things at 10%, I'm like, Alex is watching Nella at her toilette. So this book wants to be at times very highbrow. It wants to be literary. It has literary aspirations, and like all of these characters with their classical history background, again, like I said, it wants to be the secret history at times, and it tries to write in this way. And then later we get Alex was feeling territorial. And my comment, ma'am, if you have to tell me you're not a very good writer, and if you've already shown me, then still feel the need to tell me, you either think I'm stupid or you don't trust your own writing ability. Like, you're not confident in your writing. You're like, I'd better add another line just to make it clear. And this happened a lot in this book, where somebody would say something, the attitude was very clear, but then the writer would add the line like, Alex was feeling territorial. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't need that. And that's why I think the editor for this book also did the author a disservice, because a good editor would have just struck that out and been like, that's not necessary. Those are unnecessary words, right? Like, the development editor or whoever, they weren't good. And I mean, I'm an editor. I worked as an editor. So my threshold is probably a little higher than the average reader's, but it was a problem. Like, at another time, like, there was a point where where is it? Amy, having put Caius in his place, continued with her analysis. I'm like, you just showed me that, and now she's going to continue with her analysis. You do not have to tell me what just happened and what's about to happen, because I'm reading it. I'm reading it now. You don't need that. Don't write it. So, like, these little things were distracting enough to bring the book down, in my opinion, and that tells me that the characters and the story were not encompassing enough, intriguing enough, to keep me from noticing these things. Because in a really good book, I can go a long time without noticing stuff like this. Now, I pointed out in one of my comments that I'm probably actually just too old for this book. It's really for millennials. I'm a zennial, okay? I'm in that little kind of what they call like a micro generation. Like, I'm tail end of Gen X, beginning of the millennial generation. So, but like the characters in this book, like I said, Rupert and his friends are all 30. Caius mentions that he's a millennial. So, you know, I'm guessing also in his 30s, although to have made it as far up as detective, and he's been in the force for 10 years. Yeah, so, you know, 35. I think they give his age specifically at some point, but I've completely forgotten because I wasn't that interested. Then there's all these like weird little flubs that don't make sense. They at one point say, Rupert will be a knight once his grandfather dies. I'm like, knighthoods aren't hereditary. So no, he won't. He'll be a baronet, and he will be addressed as sir, because baronets get that courtesy, but he's not going to be a knight. So, like, again, the editor dropped the ball here, or somebody did. At one point, too, they're talking about an earl, and they refer to him as His Grace, and I'm like, that's a duke, not an earl. You know, like, again, the average reader might not pick up on this, or they might, I don't know, but, like, things like that where I'm like, if you're gonna write it, at least know what you're talking about. Just, that was a problem. Here was a big one for me, too. Okay, so at one point, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, so if you want to read this book, maybe tune out now, because we're going to get into some specifics, but at one point, Caius interrogates the wife of a man having an affair with the murder victim. I'll leave it generally like that. But anyway, the wife is an antiquities person, like, you know, and she gives lectures. And he goes and looks her up and buys a ticket for one of her lectures. Okay? That, so far, straightforward. After the lecture, he goes and he sits through this lecture, and after the lecture, he goes to talk to her, and he refers to her as Mrs., I'll just say it, Oswald, because that's her husband's name, and she goes, it's Dr. Bruce. I use my maiden name professionally. And I'm like, hang on. Again, here's where I'm like, is this police detective bad at his job? Like, if you looked her up online and found a ticket to her event, and she uses her maiden name, Dr. Bruce, professionally, then when you found her online, you found Dr. Bruce. And when you bought that ticket, it had Dr. Bruce on it. And when they introduced her at the lecture, it said Dr. Bruce. Like, what? Why do you not already know this? Why is this news to you now after the lecture? What are you doing? And then there was one time when they were talking about an address in Delaware that's probably a P.O. box. I'm like, do you know Google Maps? Do you know how to use Street View? This is basic. Like, I could go look up that address in Delaware if you gave it to me and tell you. And of course, a P.O. box in Delaware, in America, it would be P.O. box and a number. Now, there are shadow addresses. There are, like, that aren't P.O. boxes, but that are, like, you know, that's a whole other thing. But even still, they're easy to find. It's easy to find that out. Why are you just like, oh, it's probably a P.O. box? What are you doing? I don't know. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. Caius is kind of, so if you've read the Thursday murder books, and you know Chris, right? Who's I find very likable, and maybe it's just because he's more my age and I can relate, right? But he's, you know, trying to eat better because he's got this girlfriend and all this stuff. Okay, so Caius sounds an awful lot like Chris, but okay, his French girlfriend just dumped him, So he's trying to eat better and work out, hence the jog that finds the body and things like that. And that's like a major thing throughout the book, him like learning to cook fancy foods and stuff like that, but still backtracking and eating pizza sometimes, or things like that. But the Thursday murder books, Chris is I don't know, you kind of feel fond and sorry for him. And Caius does not engender, at least in me, he did not engender any of those positive feelings. I liked him more as the book went on, but not enough to follow him through a series of books. I liked Matt, his partner, even more, but we don't get a whole lot about him. Amy is, I think, a lesbian, but it's kind of a flyby. She mentions having girlfriends, and she mentions at one point, I don't really like men. So we don't get a lot of gay rep in all this, as best I can tell, especially like with the socialites just all kind of swapping partners on the reg. And then there's a whole other thing too here. This book I didn't know going in, so I will give you this trigger warning that there is a scene in which they are watching a video that they transcribe in which Nell is sexually assaulted. And they're watching the video, and there's a transcription of it. And the transcription's not... Okay, so on the one hand, I'm like, glad they spared us maybe the gruesome details. But at the same time, if you're going to insert it in a book as a transcript, then it needs to be true to police transcripts, where it would have broken down every thing that happened. Whereas here, like, it starts out telling you where everyone's sitting, who's speaking, what's happening, but then by the end of the transcript, they're just like, oh, and then she says no repeatedly and pushes on his chest. But like, a real transcript would have broken that out into, and she pushes on her chest, no. And the other thing about the transcript that kind of bothered me was that they used the murder victim's nickname. They were like, Clemmy does this, and I'm like, they would have, her name is Clemency, because of course it is, because these socialite names. Nell's real name is Helena, I don't know how she says it, but and then there's Rupert and Alexandros because his father's Greek, right? And like, yeah, there were just so many snags. There were just so many things that kept me from being able to really enjoy this book. There were too many obvious flaws for me. And again, my threshold is probably, my threshold to good is probably higher, particularly when you're talking about editing, than the average reader. It feels like a book that maybe TikTok people would like if they like that whole social Instagram-esque kind of thing. It could find its audience there if people started to promote it there. I could see that happening. But the characters just, again, I couldn't understand why Nell was doing some of what she did. Alex is a sympathetic character that disappears for a big chunk of the book. He pops up now and then, but you don't really get a whole lot of him. Caius is as a lead detective character. The mystery was okay, but not well written enough, and not, again, super exciting or surprising by the end of it. So yeah, it kind of fell down on all fronts for me. I wanted this book to be better, and I just saw potential, and even if it had just been a little bit funnier, I think some of the stuff that was meant to be amusing, it just wasn't. But yeah, I don't know. It didn't work for me. It might work for you. Now that I've gone on way too long about this book. I've got a couple more library books stacked up to read, and I'll decide which one to read next soon. But in the meantime, if you've read this, let me know your thoughts. If you think you want to read it, let me know your thoughts. If you want more details about the actual like murder mystery plot, we can talk about it in the comments. But yeah, it's yeah, I don't know that I would read this. I don't know if this author has other books. I feel like this author has potential and just needs a little more nurturing and a better editor. I don't think she's a bad writer. I just think there was work left to be done. And I don't know that I'd read more about this detective because I just didn't get a good feel for him. He didn't grab me as a character. So yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot going on there, but and yeah, it's just one of those things where I was like, oh, it's lost potential, and that's always a frustrating thing when reading a book. So all that said, now I really am done. And until next time, take care.